Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're diving straight into the absolutely fascinating world of cartography. We're going to look at exactly how we take our massive 3D physical world and somehow squash it onto a flat piece of paper. It's a process that literally shapes how we view everything around us, so let's get into it. Here's the game plan for today. First, we'll go from globe to map. Then, we'll cover the 5 absolute essentials of map making, categorize maps by their scale, and wrap up by looking at physical versus cultural maps.
All right, part 1, from globe to map. Let's tackle flattening the Earth.
So, think about this for a second. Have you ever tried peeling an orange and then laying that peel completely flat on a table? You can't do it, right? It rips, it stretches, it totally distorts. Well, that's exactly the sheer mathematical impossibility cartographers face when trying to perfectly flatten a 3-dimensional, curved planet onto a 2D surface. Now, technically speaking, the shape of the Earth is a geoid, which is just a fancy way of saying it's, well, Earth-shaped. Because of this, a spherical globe is hands down the most mathematically accurate way to represent its true form. But let's be real here. Globes are clunky. You're not exactly going to fold one up and shove it in your backpack or print it inside a textbook.
And that's exactly where a map comes to the rescue. It solves our portability problem by giving us a simplified 2D depiction at a much smaller scale. But, and this is a really crucial distinction, if someone just draws a rough network of lines and shapes without a definite mathematical scale, that's not a map. That's just a sketch. Scale is literally the anchor that ties that piece of paper to our actual geographic reality. Okay, moving on to part 2, the 5 essentials of map making.
Every piece of cartography is built on these 5 pillars. First up, you have to decide the scale, because that sets the limits on what you can actually show. Second is the map projection. That's the mathematical magic trick of moving from curved to flat. Third is map generalization. Fourth is the actual design, making it visually make sense. And finally, construction and production, which, let's be honest, is mostly powered by some pretty amazing computer-assisted software these days.
Now, I want to zero in on that third step for a second because it's absolutely vital. It's the cartographer's ultimate dilemma, generalization. Think about it. When you shrink the world down that much, you simply cannot show every single tree, rock, or alleyway. The cartographer has to be ruthless. They have to actively edit, select, and simplify the data. Otherwise, the map would be just as confusing as navigating the real world blindfolded. They have to design it for a very specific purpose.
Before we start categorizing our modern maps, I have to share this fascinating historical aside. Thousands of years ago, ancient Indian scholars were already deeply mapping out their spatial world. They organized the known world into 7 dvipas, or continents. And get this, classical texts like the Mahabharata were already explicitly acknowledging a round Earth surrounded by water, way back then. It just goes to show how deeply rooted spatial thinking is in our global DNA.
All right, let's jump into part 3.
Categorizing maps by scale.
So we generally split maps into 2 main buckets based on scale. And the naming can actually feel a bit backward at first. Large-scale maps zoom way in on tiny, specific areas. Think of a cadastral map that shows exact property lines for your house, or a highly detailed topographical survey. Small-scale maps, on the flip side, zoom way, way out. These are your massive wall maps or atlas pages showing entire continents. They sacrifice all that fine detail so you can see the big picture. And that brings us to part 4, categorizing maps by their function, specifically physical versus cultural maps.
Beyond just scale, we divide these special-purpose maps into 2 primary camps based on what story they're trying to tell. On one hand, you've got physical maps. These are all about nature, mountain ranges, weather patterns, soil types, things like that. On the other hand, you have cultural maps. These highlight man-made societal features. We're talking population demographics, economic trade routes, and complex transportation networks. Take a look at this. This is a cultural map, visualizing population density across the Nagpur district. Notice how it uses dots to show rural populations, and then these large, colorful pie charts to highlight urban centers, breaking down the agricultural versus industrial workforce. It is an absolutely indispensable tool for local planners who are trying to figure out where to build infrastructure.
Now here is where it gets really cool. If we take that exact same geographic footprint of Nagpur, but flip the theme to an economic map, we get an entirely different story. Suddenly, the people vanish, and instead, the map is highlighting arable land, dense forests, and exactly where crops like cotton and rice are growing. The physical shape of the district hasn't changed one bit, but the reality we're looking at has completely shifted. And let's push that even further. Same district shape, but watch what happens when the cartographer decides to map out the local industries instead. Now our focus is entirely pulled towards textile plants, heavy engineering, and food processing nodes. It completely proves the point that a map is essentially a highly focused lens. It forces your attention strictly onto the exact data the mapmaker wants you to see.
So to wrap up this explainer, the biggest takeaway I want to leave you with is this. Maps are intentional simplifications. Because generalization is completely unavoidable, every single map you ever look at represents a deliberate choice of what to highlight, and more importantly, what to erase. Which leaves us with a pretty fascinating question. As you navigate your world today, what invisible realities and hidden details are being actively edited out of the maps you rely on every single day?